Um, so we will do, if folks give their name, their organization, and their role. And then as Becca said at the beginning, we'd love to hear folks' favorite children's book, either one from your own childhood or one from a child in your life. Would love to hear and get folks to share. And if after you introduce yourself, if you could just pass it on to a person that hasn't introduced themselves yet, that would be fantastic. So I will start. I'm Anna Brulette, and I am the Policy and Program Director with Building Bright Futures and support the work of COAT. And as I said at the beginning, this was a tough question to answer. For whatever reason, the Henry and Mudge series really comes to mind from my childhood. Not super I mean, like the books themselves aren't memorable. It's about like a young boy and his very, very large dog. But I think it was like I read them at a time when I became like really cognizant of the like joy of reading and reading with my family. So those stood out to me, and I will pass it on to Beth to introduce herself.
Morning, Beth Trzanski, Deputy Director of Building Bright Futures. A favorite of my kids was Mama Panya's Pancakes, which is about a little kid in Tanzania and about his trip with his mom to the market to buy stuff to make pancakes, and the friends they make along the way. We still have it and read it. So I will hand it to Becca.
Hi guys, I'm Becca Webb. I am the Winooski Valley Act 166 coordinator. And so I'm cheating. I'm doing 2 books. My personal favorite children's book is Total. Anyway, the other one that I'm reading with kids right now, the other one that I'm reading with kids right now a lot is When Really Worried, which is a Kevin Hanks book. Where the Wild Things Are. There's the other one. I was like mixing up all those titles in my mind. And I'll pass it over to Amy.
Which Amy? I'll go.
Okay, I'm ready. So favorite children's book? Sorry, I was actually getting my puppy out from the clutches of another dog outside. It's a long story, but anyway. The favorite book for both my kids, a favorite book when they were, I want to say between like 2 or 3 and about school age, 6-ish maybe, was Barn Cat. It's woodcuts. It's a numbers accounting book. And I think part of the reason they loved it was because we thought that the barn cat itself had this really silly look on its face. So our tradition at the end of the book was to always make that goofy face. I'll pass it to, I'm not sure who has gone, but Renee.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I had to unmute in all these different places. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Amy. So I'm assuming that we're talking about our favorite children's book. I'd have to say, I mean, just coming in and try to do a quick thought. The most favorite books in the house that I've read over and over again for my kiddos would be, I think it's called Katie the Snowplow. I don't know if folks are familiar with that one. Yeah, I love it because, you know, with a book about it snowing, like the use of just white space and actually not having any drawings on pictures and being able to illustrate the snow, that's been a favorite in the household. And then for my daughter who's 9, she's really into The Littles. For those of you who might remember that book and all the imagination that comes with that. So I think those are the 2 hot ones in our household recently. And I will pass it over to Amy Johnson.
Thanks, Renee. So it's a children's book, but it's not. I feel like it's really a great book for adults, but I read this to Luna when she was a baby because she was a baby and there was a lot of time to fill. I read The Little Prince. I love it so much. I love the pictures. I love all the symbolism. It's just such a great book. And Luna now can read herself, so she likes to read it now too, which is really cool. Yeah. Oh, and I didn't say I'm Amy, Parent Child Center of NCSS, Parent Child Center Network. I'll pass it to Janet.
Good morning, all. Janet Kilburn here, Health Department. Help me grow. I love this. Thinking about favorite children's books, it's really hard to pick one. I really love Elsa Beskow series. She's a Swedish writer, wrote like over 100 years ago, but she has this story of a little boy, Pelle's new skis, and he gets new Nordic skis, and he's in Norway, and he finds the winter palace of the king and all these elves making various winter toys like skates and sleds, and all these children playing at the palace, and it's sweet. It's very sweet. And I will pass it to, let's see who's on here. Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Larson from the Family Place. I'm the Specialized Child Care Coordinator. And my favorite childhood book was Corduroy. There's nothing better than a corduroy. I will pass it to Jen F. Is there two Jens? Nope.
Hello, my name is Jen. I am the parent lead for the HRSA grant and the co-chair of the Families and Communities Committee. I'm the parent representative on this council. So my favorite children's book when I was a kid was If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, kind of that series, Pig a Pancake, and kind of that series. And I still have those that we read with my kiddos now. But the book that I tend to read the most nowadays with my littles is Up in the Garden and Down in the Dirt. It's really cute about what happens to a garden through all the seasons. It's actually fun. And I will pass it to, I'm not really sure who has gone. Cooper.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cooper Siegel, and I'm a child development specialist at Help Me Grow Vermont. And I don't know, I've been thinking about my favorite books. There's a lot of ones, I think different series that are coming to mind from when I was a kid. I remember loving the Richard Scarry books with Huckle the Cat and Lowly Worm. My cat's name was Huckle after those books because I'm very original. But then I was also thinking about the Berenstein Bear books. I remember reading those like as many as I could get my hands on. So I think I was really big on series is what I can say. But I will pass that on to Lauren.
Thanks, Cooper. Hi, Lauren Smith, the Help Me Grow coordinator. And Amy, I have to go with Little Prince as well. That is my all-time favorite, and working really hard to get crew to really enjoy it as much as I do, which, you know, as you can imagine, is going really well. It always works out. But he really loved Harry the Dirty Dog, was one that we started when he was really little, and that one stuck, and we still go back to that one often. So those are my two, and I will pass it on. I came in late like some others. So Cynthia, did you go yet?
I haven't. Good morning, everyone.
Right.
Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cynthia Green. I work with Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed. I have way too many children's books as an early educator. I can't even remember what I read myself because I've been reading books for so long. I love anything by Audrey Wood and Dawn Wood. So like King Good's in the Bathtub, The Napping House, Silly Sally. They're all just amazing. And I guess I would also say some other ones. I like The Talking Eggs and Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. These are all, books for real youngsters. Let's see. I came in a little bit late, so apologies. Sheila, have you gone yet?
I have not. Thank you, Cynthia. Like Cynthia, I have been an avid reader my entire life, and there's no way. There's way too much pressure to try to pick a favorite book. But I will say that I now have grandchildren, and our house is once again filled with books for 6 and 7 month old children. And I also have a 4.5-year-old granddaughter, and she's not quite ready for chapter books, but she's past the infant books. So I just on a whim picked up a Dr. Seuss big book of stories, which has 6 of the individual Dr. Seuss stories in one big book. And she was delighted to have a big girl book and delighted with the stories. And she visited last week and we read the book, and I've read it to her every night on the portal since she left. So we're starting to explore the, in between children's books and chapter books. So if anybody has good ideas for very beginner chapter books, I'd love to hear them. And I have no idea who hasn't gone. I have a new computer, so I had to download Zoom, and I've been fixing the view and doing all kinds of stuff while we've been talking. So my apologies.
No worries. I believe Kaya hasn't gone. Kaya, we're sharing a name, role, and favorite children's book. If you're in a place you can share.
There we go. Sorry. Zoom was not cooperating, so I'm sorry I'm late. Kaya Ganguly, the Director of Trauma Prevention and Resilience Development for the state of Vermont. And favorite, I have a more obscure one, Sendak's in the Night Kitchen. And I love that book just because it talks about how kids wake up at night and want to explore, and I love the illustrations.
Excellent. Thank you. Who else have we not heard from?
I'm happy to go. I have not gone yet. I'm Sarah Wallace-Broder, the interim president CEO of VFN, as well as the vice president of operations here. So I have young adult children. My youngest is a senior in high school. So it's been great to hear all the names of the books that I read, I feel like a long time ago. One that we read quite a bit because of the illustrations that went along with it was called The Watering Hole. And it was a story that actually went through the watering hole drying up and what happened to the animals. And then the rains finally came back. So it kind of pulled in some climate change into it, but beautiful illustrations. And it just was fun to look at those pictures as well as read. And did Renee go?
I did. Thank you, Sarah.
Michelle?
No, I haven't gone. Michelle Johnson, Agency of Education, Early Childhood Education Consultant. And I wanted to pick 3. When I was a child, nobody knows this book. It was called Benjamin Budge and Barnaby Ball. It was about 2 men. One was very, very tiny and lived in this huge house, and one was very big and lived in a tiny house. And they switched homes. They were neighbors and they ended up switching homes. It's very cute. My kid's favorite book was Ferdinand. And my favorite classroom book was Night Tree by Eve Bunting. It's about a family's tradition going out into the woods and decorating a tree for the animals in the wintertime. So that was one of a classroom project that I used to do with the kids. We would make dried oranges and pine cone bird feeders and hang them out in the trees in the wintertime. And Morgan, I don't think Morgan's gone. Did we lose her?
She had to hop on a phone call, so she'll be back.
Okay. I think everybody else is gone though.
There's another Janet signed in. Is that Janet? Is that your phone, or is there a different Janet on the call that wants?
It's my phone. Sorry,
just checking.
we got both going.
All right, I think we have everyone. Thank you all for sharing. And with that, I think we're going to pivot to our main purpose of today, which is that we're really excited to test out with you all a monitoring protocol. We're trying to come up with a more jazzy name, so please share if you are inspired. But a monitoring protocol for the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. So I'll let Beth kind of take it away with how that's going to work and what the purpose of this tool is.
Awesome, thank you. It's great to be with you all this morning. So one of the things that the Building Bright Futures State Advisory Council and the broader network is charged with is monitoring our vision, which is articulated in the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. And this is the state's strategic plan for how we improve the well-being of children and families with a focus on prenatal through age 8. It was updated in 2020-ish, and it's roughly a 5-year plan. So today we're going to, we're about halfway through. And annually, there's kind of this annual cycle that we use to make sure that it's not a plan that goes on a shelf and we forget, right? Plans are not very helpful if we do that. So we've worked hard to make it as live as possible, right? It is a living document. It is something that we reference regularly when we are looking at how to use resources, where we should put energy, looking how we're measuring progress, how we are kind of building policies to move things forward. And it is something ideally that we all hold. And at the same time, having a living document and a plan that we hold can be challenging. Like, I think this is actually one of the most challenging pieces of maintaining a vibrant system is maintaining that vibrant vision and then knowing what to do with that vision. And so one thing that we would like to do better is to figure out how do we take a moment in time to say, how are we doing with this plan and with this achieving this vision? And so I'm going to invite you today to go through what we've called a monitoring protocol, but was really a facilitated process that we would like to be able to use at next month's VCAP summit. So annually, there's a cycle for the VCAP, and annually, usually in July, but we're moving it a little bit earlier out of vacation season. So the May SAC meeting will be focused on the VCAP. And the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan, again, what has been, there's been multiple versions and many of you have been involved. So I'm not kind of going into depth about what it is, but we are going to move through a process, actually break into 2 groups. And Anna and I have chose an objective level. So diving even deeper, there's 4 goals of the action plan. And typically we talk about those 4 goals, but we don't actually talk about the levels below. And so recognizing that not everyone may be quite as familiar with the VCAP as some of us are steeped in it all the time. But that's perhaps not your job to be like referencing the VCAP or having it up on your screen like I do. So we are going to break into 2 groups. We've selected 2 objectives in 2 different parts of the VCAP that we are going to use as our focus. And we'll walk you through a short visioning exercise so we really get our heads wrapped around what does success look like? What does the future state look like when we've achieved that objective? And then rewind and think about what have we achieved reaching that vision, and then a strategy discussion about what are some key priorities and actions or policy recommendations that are needed in the next year or 2 or 2.5 as we get towards the next time we will update the VCAP, which is 2026. Okay, so that's our goal. And we've written out somewhat of steps that we will move you through. So it's a little bit more facilitated and structured than our average meeting, but there's definitely we need your participation to be able to both articulate what that vision looks like and mark progress, and then have that strategy discussion. So by the end of our time together, these are the goals of the process: is to clarify the vision set out in the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan, to mark progress towards goals and objectives, to guide purposeful actions that consider challenges, policy recommendations, and outcomes, and to increase the likelihood that the vision becomes a reality. That's our hope for today. Just a few things. Any questions at this point before we break into two groups? Okay, Anna, do you have us queued up, or should I do the breakout rooms?
I do not have the breakout rooms queued up. I can.
No,
And
it's
we'll
okay, I got
ask-
it.
Okay. We'll ask folks, to choose what objective they want to focus on, I believe, right, Beth, based on their own interests. So the two objectives that we are focusing for the purpose of this conversation on today is objective 2.2, which is promote child, family, and community resilience, connection, and belonging. And objective 3.4, which is focused on strengthening the quality of developmental services and education for each and every young child.
Okay. I am going to open the room and more roughly divided us, and we'll see you in that other room. There we go. So Anna, I'm going to join the breakout and you will stay in this group. Okay. Let's see if I can join.
Okay, I think people have successfully moved out of our room, so I think we're ready to get started. So I lied. I guess we did random assignment. We are focusing in this room on objective 3.4. So strengthen the quality and development of developmental services and education for each and every young child. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to start by kind of reviewing that specific objective within the VCAP as a group. So I will go ahead and do that. All right, are you all seeing objective 3.4? Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm not gonna, for the purpose of time, I'm not going to run through each of these bullets, but I will read for everyone the strategies associated with this objective. And you all can read and review the bullets. So again, strengthen the quality of developmental services and education for each and every young child. So strategy 1 is promote an integrated, continuous statewide model of child development and education from pre-kindergarten education through 3rd grade. So some things that are associated with that, we have VELS, we have best practices for strengthening and supporting early care and education program business practices across settings. We have early literacy for children pre-K through grade 3, and a statewide model to include prenatal to 3 resources, services, and supports. So kind of a lot of things fitting into this one strategy. The second strategy associated with this objective is support, strengthen, and maintain the quality of programs through evaluation and professional development for administrators, educators, and providers. So this is really kind of focused on the folks who are implementing this developmental system that we're talking about. So all sorts of things associated with this strategy, MTSS, research informed professional development, and peer professional networks kind of stand out there. And then finally, oh no, that's the last strategy. So those two strategies are kind of what we will be focusing on. Kaya, it looks like your hand is raised.
So I read fast. I was reading through all of them. Where does DEI fit into this?
That's an excellent question.
I don't see it called out anywhere, and I think when it's not called out, it's really easy to ignore.
I completely agree. I do not see it called out in this specific objective either. And it's interesting that you raised that, because as part of, I'm going to stop my share so I can see you all. As part of our process of kind of doing a crosswalk of the VCAP as a whole, as part of the VIP3 grant that we're working on through HRSA, we're really kind of purposely looking at where is DEI, where is that work explicitly called out, where is it more, where is it not stated as explicitly, and where does it really need to be? So we're really kind of interrogating that throughout the VCAP and thinking about, you know, in the next iteration, like where is it important to really state that, and to think about how does that, as you're saying, like how does that move us forward in thinking about those pieces throughout those conversations.
So my other question would be, in those conversations, do you have representation from marginalized and or BIPOC groups that may see things or catch things that you do not?
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. That's a great point. I appreciate that. And I wish Jen was in our group here, but it's good that she's in the other one, as they're focusing more on families and communities oriented work. But that's a big part of our efforts to employ and work with cultural liaisons to ensure that they're really part of and driving the family leadership work that includes kind of thinking about what that next VCAP will look like and who is involved in those conversations. Renee, you have your hand raised as well. I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts, and I certainly want to hear from Renee, but I do want to also walk us through this protocol a little bit more. So Renee, and then perhaps more.
I'll be super quick, Anna. I just wanted to kind of respond to Kaya, knowing that I might be a little bit more familiar with this document. I think as the VCAP, this version of the VCAP was coming together, it was kind of a both and, right? That we were also working to really strengthen representation at our many tables, and really working with families and communities to explore cultural brokers. Because I do see it on page 6, we certainly addressed it, right? But we've had this conversation before about not just having one statement somewhere, but really making sure that diversity, equity, inclusion are interwoven throughout these pieces. And so I just say, I think under the PDG grant, when we were trying to produce this, like we recognized that we needed to do a lot more work in that area. And I see kind of, the BBF statement and their commitment expressed on page 7, but I think that really is some of the meat we need to work with in this next round, is really making sure, like, okay, we've got these value statements around diversity, equity, inclusion, but how are those really manifested within each of these strategies, and how are we ensuring that there's good representation at tables to get us there? So I just wanted to throw it out. I think the intent is there, but it really was kind of a dual process. We were really building on expanding our capacity to include and intentionally include diverse voices at the table when this was developed. So.
And I appreciate it. I just always feel a need to call it out when I see it, just because I think there was a real appetite for this work right after George Floyd. But since then, because it's not something white people face every day, it starts sliding down
Yeah.
as other things come forward. So I will always be the pain in the butt voice in the room about this.
Kay, I think that that's critical for you to be able to call attention to that because, and I will say, Anna's correct. We did write a whole grant, a 5-year HRSA funded grant around how we're thinking about updating this strategic plan focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion and the voices of families, right? So that we are just in year 1, a planning phase of this longer grant, partnering with VDH, and I see Lauren and Janet here as well, and really thinking about how are we not just creating something that isn't necessarily representative of the populations of children and families that we're trying to serve and reach through marginalized populations. And so what does that mean? And the document that Anna's talking about in this strategic plan crosswalk, what we've done in this first year is actually put together across every goal, objective, and strategy a list of check boxes, and one column is equity, diversity, equity, inclusion. One is family leadership and engagement. Another, right? And so and another is aligned with maternal and child health. And now that we have the template built, now we want to be able to go out over the next year and actually engage the right voices to say, okay, where should we have each of these things specifically call out diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where are we missing the mark? What does this mean to you? And how would we, in the next iteration of the strategic plan, update it to actually meet the vision that we've outlined? So it's very much so a starting point, but I think it's really important for everybody to be brainstorming. How do we do that well? If we're really going to update the strategic plan using this lens, what does that mean? And how are we going to do it?
Thanks.
Anna, can I just quickly add about the Vermont Guiding Principles as well? Because Kay may not know that whole history, but this work is really grounded in a document called the Vermont Guiding Principles that has lots of other tools and techniques to help providers implement. But it was a 2-year process that was very community-based and family voice driven, and it had many families who'd received early intervention, many advocates, family voices advocates, and diverse families as well. So it's a continual process. I think you're absolutely right to bring it up. And I just wanted to say there is a history here where we're trying. And then also, can we just clarify? I'm just a little confused. So we're not really the objectives. Can you tell me again the objectives we're addressing? And is it under goal 2? It's not goal 1. Is that right? I'm looking at the BCAP right now. I'm just trying to get grounded.
Sure, no worries. Yes, so we're looking at 3.4, objective 3.4, which is under goal 2 or goal 3. Renee's saying goal 3. Okay. I thank you all. That was a great kind of introductory conversation. And I hope that kind of more of those themes come up as we dive into this, because I think they're all really important and kind of exactly the thinking we want to be doing in terms of our, as we walk through this protocol, like part of it is really thinking about like, what is the intent of how it is written, and what therefore is like the progress that we're really wanting to see be made. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts on that. So I'm going to start to walk through this. So I'm going, based on what we just read and talked about, I want to ask folks to step into this a future state in 2026 and describe what we see when we have accomplished these specific goals and objectives. Following 5 years of hard work and accomplishments, how would you describe what you see, hear, and feel? And this is not so much a hope or a wish. This is a description of what is actually currently in place in your projected future. So during this time, I'm going to kind of remind folks and encourage folks to use the present tense and really describe things as though they have happened in a world in which we have achieved strengthening the quality of developmental services and education for each and every young child in Vermont. So with that, I'm going to kind of pause and let folks reflect on that. We did send out, I can send folks a link again, We sent out a link to this monitoring protocol if you want to kind of review that question, but I'm going to just be quiet for a moment while folks reflect on a present state of 2026. Okay, looks like Renee is ready to share something.
I'm just curious, Anna, and you can tell me if I'm approaching this in way too much of a black and white way. But for me, I scroll up in the VCAP and look at the outcomes, like the indicator, not the outcomes, the indicators that we've assigned to this area. And like that to me becomes what I would want to see in that future state. Like, so, and I, like I said, I know that I'm a black and white person and a data person. So it's harder for me to get that, like, oh, I'm experiencing this and I'm feeling this in this current state. Like I look at, I'm on page 19 and 20, just looking to those indicators around developmental and educational outcomes. And I'm thinking, yeah, any family who needs care from 0 to 5 has access, or we've seen the percent of children reading at grade level by 3rd grade increase, or so I guess my contribution is probably not like the robust kind of you know, really deep sense of like what the future looks like. But for me, when I think about monitoring our progress, I just concretely go back to these indicators and say, we're going to be in a context where we've seen increases in these things that we've identified and decreases in these other areas. One other thing before I go off mute, I think, and I will just kind of, it's not discomfort, but just one of the challenges that I have with this kind of activity, and quite honestly, I guess with the VCAP as a whole, and Beth's not in the room, and I don't know if Morgan's back, but as we were developing this, folks might remember there was a design. Hey, Morgan. I just remember being at WSOC and having some really rich, passionate conversations about whether or not within the VCAP we should be identifying the who that's responsible and the how these things are getting done. And so for me, I keep coming back to that. It's difficult when I look through this list of strategies. If we're talking about how we're monitoring these things, I'm kind of at a loss because I'm still at a point where I don't know who's responsible for implementing these things, like the how. This says this is what we're going to do, but how are we doing that and who's the lead on that is still kind of missing. And so I struggle with us being able to assess how well we're doing without kind of having more of those concrete points.
I love that point, Renee, because in the VCAP monitoring document that we have internal to BBF, we have a column where we've started to identify who are all the partners that we know that are currently doing work in X, Y, and Z areas. And it's not that it's formally in the VCAP that it says VDH is doing X, DMH is doing X, but we know and have that kind of thought process, and we're leaning in that direction for thinking about how we monitor this. So that's the conversation we want to have with all of you. How should we be monitoring this? Is the next iteration of the VCAP actually calling attention? Like, we made a specific decision at that point, not to say, here are the exact programs that are doing the things and how they're doing those things. How should we do that moving forward? Because how we're monitoring the progress in each of these goals is by the work that each of your teams is doing in those areas and looking for those outcomes and tracking the data that you're all providing. So it's not as explicit in the VCAP, but how should we be thinking about that? So Renee, you're headed in the exact same direction we are. And that's why we're having these conversations right now. What is the work that you're all doing that is moving towards this vision? And how do we capture that in a cohesive way?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that, still that fine line, and I'm thinking strictly in RBA terms, but around population measures and performance measures, right? And collective impact, and this concept that all of our organizations and entities individually are running programs that have performance measures, but in theory, those programs and activities and that we're measuring our progress on all feed into a bigger machine to look at, are we making, you know, population level changes collectively? So I think for me, it's still trying to understand and think through the kinks of how do we coalesce all of the activities that we're doing and looking at our individual performance measures, and then how does that translate into population level changes, and how do you monitor population level, you know, changes? That's a whole sticky wicket in itself. But I will stop. Thank you for entertaining my black and whiteness, and I will turn it over to some other folks in the room.
No
All right,
worries.
so I'll add gray to your black and white. How's that sound? So I think part of this too is really leaning into however you choose to measure to ensure that you're using valid qualitative measures. And I'm not talking about quotes or a focus group where you pull quotes, but where you decide your data analysis plan ahead of time, collect the qualitative data, and then analyze the qualitative data. Because if you do it that way, you're gonna get reliable and valid results. I'm a qualitative researcher with 20 years of experience, and I'm horrified at what passes for qualitative research in this state. So, and I think it can enrich and help tell the story of what's going on if it's done with fidelity.
I think that's a great point, Kaya. And I think Renee's points like this, the black and white thinking was not at all, it didn't come off that way. And I think it's very much in line with kind of what we're thinking about within this protocol. I think like if you flip both of what you shared, and for instance, like what Kaya just shared in terms of rigorous qualitative research and protocols, and just said in 2026, I envision that, you know, developmental services and supports for young children and their families will be supported by rigorous research is kind of exactly what we're thinking with this. So I really appreciate both of those thoughts. Does anyone else have kind of things they'd like to share related to this present state where we have achieved this specific strategy or objective? Okay, I'll let folks continue to think, but I'm going to start to walk through kind of the next step of this process.
I'll give you one. Sorry, not to interrupt you, and I feel like I'm talking a lot. And this is based on what's happening today nationally and locally. But I'd love to see something here where we're supporting child development and professional. We have been able to created a statewide model of child development that includes gender identity. And that it's something that we talk about regularly and that our professionals are trained in, especially given the climate towards trans folk and the law that just went into effect in Florida saying K-3, we can't talk about gay. I think calling that out explicitly would be really helpful as doing the right thing. So we've done the right thing for families so that when children come out and start questioning, and we know that can happen as early as 2 or 3, that they're supported and that our professionals are trained in how to work with this.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling that out. But I think that's That's so important. And I think it's really embedded in both of the strategies that we're thinking about in this objective, right? Supporting young children and families and supporting the professionals who are doing that work and doing it and learning, you know, in this moment how to do that work better. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to walk us to the next step, which is really kind of thinking about looking back. So where did we come from and what are key accomplishments? So now we're speaking in the past tense or speaking in different tenses is a-okay. But I want to give folks a moment to think about key accomplishments in the past 3 years and encourage you all to be like as concrete as possible. So I think what Kaya just shared is a really good example of a more concrete piece of this strategy or objective. So kind of rewind based on that projected future. What have we achieved? How have we gotten there? No worries, Sarah. Maybe part of how we've gotten there is, you know, monitoring all these pieces more effectively. Some of those things that Renee pointed out. Lauren, do you have a thought to share?
Yeah, I'll share and I'll ask all of you to come along on this internal ride with me because I can't promise that it will be as black and white as Renee's comment, and it seems a little grayer than Kaya's. But for me, when I think about a system that supports early developmental health of both the children and the families in our communities, there has to be a paradigm shift. And I know that this has been part of the conversation at some of the tables around systems change and the way that our systems were focused on specific, and not to say that this is not important, but focus on specific outcomes versus allowing the relational process that's necessary to support early developmental health for both children and families, both among family systems and cultures, as well as with the providers who are working with those families. And currently in our systems, we don't have the capacity, right? We don't have the time, the resources, or the focus on what it takes to really build those relationships and to support families with building those relationships with the children, with their own children. So I feel like a huge part of this conversation has to be around how we're shifting our entire system from being kind of, you know, this top-down services provided to families to more of this relational framework, which is going to be a huge change. And then it's within that relational framework that we can implement strategies where providers are, you know, focusing more on the relationship that they have with families and coming to it with a, you know, equity focused lens and strategies. But the way that our system is set up right now, where we have checklists and things that we have to do so that we can measure these outcomes, we have competing motivations, right? So I just feel like that's a huge kind of undertone to all of this work. And I know that's not super articulate, but I feel like it has to be part of our change, is that we're acknowledging that there's this huge paradigm shift in order for this system to be different in the future.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. That paradigm shift definitely feels kind of like that, that piece of how getting from point A to point B. So I appreciate that. I see Renee has her hand raised, and then we'll go to Amy.
We can go to Amy first. I've already talked a little bit. Go ahead, Amy.
Thanks, Renee.
Thanks, Renee. So as we're talking, I'm thinking about a class that I took 10 years ago. And it was the broad focus was around coordination and collaboration and a variety of elements related to that. But something that I think about in this discussion is that when we talk about monitoring in this context, what we're often talking about is impact monitoring. There are different kinds of monitoring, right? So I think there were, I was going to try to look it up before I spoke. So take this with a grain of salt, but I think there were like 7 kinds or something that we studied about at that time. And I'll give you an example of another that came up when I was listening to Lauren just now. Another one is, it's like strategy monitoring. So you're kind of thinking about, is the actual strategy that's being used working? Another one was assumption monitoring. So when you create a plan, you look at the broader assumptions that underlie the plan. And so periodically you want to say, did those assumptions play out? Because there will also be kind of uncertainties, right? There will be extraneous things that can just mess with your assumptions, like pandemics, for example. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm not sure exactly what I'm assuming our definition of monitoring is probably around impact mostly. But it may be worth looking into some of those other kinds of monitoring as we think about improving the kind of monitoring that we do. I'll get off my high horse here.
Thank you for that, Amy. I love your thinking on this. And it's actually something that Anna and I posed actually with Janet and Lauren on one of our national calls this past week. So we've been on federal TA calls with HRSA to talk about how are states really thinking about documenting impact of systems change? What does that mean? How is it happening across the country? What data are people using? What indicators and metrics? How are other states and how is the country thinking about documenting systems change? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? It's a bigger thing. And I don't think based on what I heard from HRSA that there is this beautiful one way that other folks have done it. I think that everybody is really in the weeds right where we are right now saying, okay, we have a strategic plan and we're thrilled about that. We know it's not perfect. It needs updating and we're in the process of thinking about that. But how are we actually monitoring the impact of all of the different pieces? Yes, there's population level data. Yes, there's some qualitative data. But how as a system are we monitoring the impact of systems change?
Yeah. And I'll just throw out there that the context for that discussion was around the emergence of something that HRSA has used a lot, which are coins, those improvement and innovation networks, right? As well as, rapid system improvements. How do we apply those at the systemic level?
That's great. Thanks so much, Amy. That's, as Morgan said, super relevant to a lot of conversations we're having right now. I'm going to turn it to Renee, but first I just want to quickly recognize that we're not getting our comrades here are going to rejoin us at 10. And we're not getting to the final and perhaps most important part of this protocol, which is really kind of thinking about next steps and kind of reflecting on, based on the progress that we want to make based on that future that we see, how do we work together to kind of overcome challenges and barriers that we've recognized and acknowledged here. So I'd love folks to kind of just be reflecting on that piece and to kind of think about how do we articulate those within this monitoring protocol? Are these the right questions to be asking? And what are those specifically for this objective? What are those next steps? So Renee, I'll turn it over to you again.
No, let's go with it, Anna. You've got a time crunch. I was not paying attention to that, so let's go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And would love your thoughts on this next piece. But yeah, closing out this protocol, we're really thinking about purposeful action. So, as I said, based on that projected future, based on a lot of the priorities you all have expressed within within getting to a state where we have this strong, equitable, inclusive, developmental and early childhood relational health system. What do we need to change either within the current system? What are the strategies to getting there? Is there specific changes we need to make to the VCAP to be collectively working towards that system? What are those kind of tangible next steps?
I would just say that this is important context, I think, for the work that the state is doing currently to redesign our quality recognition and improvement system. And I'll bring it there.
And I would just say something which I said earlier is explicitly call out in the plan where DEI fits in, explicitly. If we're going to look at development, then explicitly talk about what type of training or knowledge is necessary to be able to support families and to help families gather the information, especially for trans kids. Trying to find the information of what's around in Vermont and who does what is backbreaking. You know, trying to find physicians who do treatment, trying to find all that kind of stuff that families need for that specific goal, but also just looking at how do we communicate or make information easily accessible. I think that's important. I found this out because I'm on the Mental Health Integration Council, and I was assigned what I thought was a simple task, which is let's find out how many of each category of health provider do we have. I am 18 documents in and not even close to being done because information is so scattered and some old, some goes back to 2016. I think as a larger picture, we need to really think about how do we gather this information and how do we do this we're a small state. We shouldn't be this scattered, and we are.
Kaya, I'm so appreciative of that comment. And I'm channeling Jen and our Families and Communities Committee right now, because this is one of the things that they have identified as a group is one of the biggest challenges is how do families find out what is available, who they contact, how to get it, and to actually get access to services. And that's a question they're posing, or some variation of that question in the next family engagement assessment. How are you as families finding out about what you have access to, and what does that mean, and how are you actually accessing it? So I'm glad you brought it up. I wish Jen was here to be able to say, hey, yes, that. Because that's
for families. Yeah, for families, it's that whole thing of you don't know what you don't know. So when you're looking for something and you can't, maybe it doesn't, you assume it doesn't exist. Or I can see if you're not persistent or you're not a good researcher, where you're just going to spin in circles.
Absolutely. And the committee is kind of asking and hoping to answer really interesting questions around that, Kaya, related to even if you find that service or support, do you feel welcome in that environment? Do you feel like your family's needs and experiences and values are really being matched or met by that support or service? So we're really excited to kind of explore those things with the committee.
Jen, we were trying to channel you and the Families and Communities Committee to respond to some of the feedback, because we know that you're doing a lot of this work. So just a quick shout out and a thank you.
Well, it's great to be back. So before we definitely want to debrief the process and the protocol, because we appreciate you testing this out with us. But before we get into that process, I wonder if there's takeaways or any aha moments from the conversations in terms of kind of ability, what does your vision look like for for the specifics objective level that you were discussing? So invite you to share whether it's about the vision, about the accomplishments, or about strategy and priorities for the future.
I'll just share out that I think that as a reflection, even in this COVID moment, which we're still very much in, but even in this COVID moment, we have accomplished an awful lot, right? There's still far to go, but we have made substantial accomplishments. And I think I liked that part of the process, was that identification of like, what have we done?
Thanks. Yeah, Renee, jump in. Folks can just jump in.
I'm trying to be good because I can't be on camera, so you can't read my social cues of like my mouth awkwardly opening as I'm about to say something. I think it's worth, I just personally feel like it's worth elevating something that Lauren brought up in our conversation. Lauren, I hope you don't mind, and I hope I'm not butchering what you said, but I just really appreciated that point about the importance of the relational way in which these things happen. And I'm not nearly as articulate as you were. You were articulate. You might not think so. You were great. But just this idea that these things don't just happen like inputs and outputs and machines and checkboxes. Like this work of making true impactful change and really improving not just outcomes, but just the experience of Vermont kids and families, like that all happens within a relational context. So I think as we're looking ahead to how are we revising or how are we doing that, I think we do need to, okay, just as you said about exclusively calling out diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we also need to exclusively call out the process in which these changes happen, and that is very much a relational process. So just wanted to elevate that because it stuck with me, Lauren. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Renee. Any other takeaways from the conversations?
Yeah, I can jump in. Part of our conversation was just jumping back to basic needs of families, and kind of what I have taken away from the work that I'm particularly doing right now with the Family Engagement Assessment Survey and creating that is to maybe include a section of basic needs and what to help collect data around what the needs are, or not what the needs are, but where people sit with basic needs and whether or not their basic needs are being met. And so that's kind of what is going on in my world right now.
Thanks, Jen. And Jen, it's so great to have you here. I know it's hard to prioritize with your family, but the conversation is so much richer when you are able to be here. Great. Any other takeaways? Okay. So just want to take a few minutes to do what I call a plus delta. Plus being what worked about the process, and delta being the Greek letter for change of what would you recommend we do differently next time. So feel free to jump in terms of improvements on what we're calling the VCAP monitoring protocol, but we'll come up with a jazzier name with your help. So in terms of language we were using that worked or didn't, was too formal, that kind of thing.
Kea and members of our group, I know we talked a little bit about the process and how we think about monitoring. Does anyone want to summarize how we talked about monitoring? Amy Bolger was really instrumental in that conversation as well. I don't see her right now, but
she had to hop off. Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was a really great discussion about monitoring in general, right? It's not just about this process, but like, how are we really truly monitoring the VCAP? How is that happening at a national level? How are people thinking about systems change? What does that mean What type of data are we looking at? Is it population data? Is it qualitative data? What is the difference between having discussions and capturing the qualitative feedback versus rigorous qualitative research? And how do we think about those things?
Yeah, I can speak to that piece of it just because I'm pretty passionate. I think in Vermont, we really need to look at how we collect qualitative and report on qualitative data, because what people generally do is just take quotes that support whatever they're writing. They don't actually think about ahead of time, how am I framing this? Who am I looking for? And what data analysis measure am I going to use? And then follow that plan afterward. Because when you don't do that, you don't end up with rigorous, reliable, or valid data. You just end up with quotes. So, and if you do it correctly, and you're doing it the way you should with any other data gathering effort, you don't know how well you're doing because you haven't spent the time in the front end to set this up so that you get data that you can say, yeah, this is valid. I know it's an accurate representation of what's going on.
Great point. Thank you. Cynthia?
Thanks, Beth. I was not part of that conversation, but Kaya's comments and Morgan's comments remind me of work with Frameworks Institute, where I feel like Vermont is moving toward a lot of storytelling. And to that point, how do we choose those stories? What stories get elevated? How accurate is that as a data analysis point? And Frameworks in particular talked about sort of this episodic stories, which are about one person or one family, versus really looking systemically. And so I feel like this action plan is an opportunity to really think systemically. And so I think our data and the stories that we tell do need that research base if we're going to really shift policy and investment on a systemic level.
Thank you. Renee?
So this is a half-formed thought, but I'll spit it out anyway. I'm just wondering, and those of you who know me again, I tend to gravitate towards the black and white. So in terms of like this process, like the opening exercise of like envision this and like that's a stretch for me. It's not necessarily a good skill set that I have. But then it just struck me like, I just wonder if part of my challenge in thinking about like, what does this world, if we've accomplished this, what does it look like? What does it feel like, right? Like, what does it smell like? No one likes to ask that question. Trying to do all that sensory stuff. Like, I just wonder if I struggle with that activity, because when we're talking about these outcomes that we want to see in the VCAP, they really are child and family outcomes. And I'm just wondering, like, I feel like within myself, like, yeah, I'm a mom. Yeah, I've got kids. And yet in my professional role, sometimes I just silo myself in my experiences. And so when I'm thinking about, like, how does this feel if kids actually have access to the full range of developmental services and education that they need, there's a part of me that feels like in order to really sit in that place of visioning, we need more family voice in the room. So I don't know what the plans are for VCAP and if we're going to have some great crossover with the Families and Communities Committee or how we're engaging other families. But for me, it just feels like a sticking point. It's kind of like my professional blinders are on in a sense. And it's very hard for me to extrapolate and say, this is what it feels like, because there's still a part of me that doesn't feel like an end user in the system. Like, even though I feel very much kind of operating from my professional role, and it's harder for me to speak to that vision of what does it feel like on the ground for the kids and families. So for me, that I think this process is good, just kind of expressing some of my own personal challenges and thinking, I just think it would be a much more robust exercise if we can intentionally include more family voice. Because to your point, Morgan, what you were talking about, and Amy, about like, are we measuring impact? Probably. Well, we want the impact to be on kids and families, like not necessarily the professionals saying, yeah, this worked well. So to do that visioning, I just feel like maybe we should be thinking about how to really intentionally ensure there's a lot of family, stakeholder voice that really isn't professional voice.
Great point. Thank you, Renee. Janet, you have your hand up, and Kaya.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I love what you just said. And I think I'm thinking about monitoring and the monitoring process and involving family voice. And I wonder about the BBF councils as a way to access community and family voice through potentially like an event, and really, advertising and utilizing like community gatherings and families who've experienced services, whether a variety of services, just and having some sort of a roundtable discussion. It would be great if we had a qualitative research or evaluator to help develop questions, so it could be really inform high quality qualitative research, but as a way of monitoring the VCAP and sharing kind of progress, but also helping set that vision, and then being accountable to families who receive the services and sharing results back in a visual format, or a format that's easily understood and accessible. But I think the BBF Council network and the community partner connections and the events that they already do to reach families and communities could be a natural way, and it could be under the auspices of the Families and Communities Committee. Certainly they could help drive those activities.
Thanks, Janet. Kaya?
So I love what Janet and Renee said. I'm going to build on that, and something I had said, I don't know, in another meeting, which involved getting me dragged into coat, which is okay. I'm glad to be here. But we also need to envision how we get that family voice and get it on their terms, not ours. Because, we invite families or parents or something to events, and we talk about parent engagement, but we're still talking about it in the context of what works for us. And it would be, we don't know that they want to sit at a table. Maybe they want a picnic. Do you know what I mean? It's this standard way of trying to pull families in and talking around and around and around about how do we get more families involved, without really directly going to the families and saying what works for you. Because we know some of these families are so overwhelmed with what's going on in their lives. And those are the voices that we want. It's not necessarily, not that I love the families who have the time and energy to get involved. I have so much respect for them. But we really want to include the voices of those families that are so overwhelmed that they don't know what's going on. And that might be something like, if I'm going to envision something where direct service workers are given 2 questions, just 2. So we're not overwhelming somebody, to ask parents and just write down notes of what they say, ask permission, explain what we're doing, ask those 2 questions, and we use that data and we analyze it qualitatively. But I think we need to really start envisioning, how do we meet families where they're at and take off our paradigm and blinders to say what works for you.
Yeah, yes, definitely aligned with our conversation last month as well. Michelle, last comment, and then we are going to share some updates.
Yes, I agree with Renee and Kaya. Kaya, sorry. In my experience, working with families, there's a lot of trust issues. So building those relationships is hugely important. And for some families, it takes a lot of time. We're not talking about days or weeks, we're talking about months. So in a public forum, it's going to be difficult to get the picture of the needs. So I like the idea of going to family partners in programs, say Head Start programs, or going to family centers and getting that data that way with the permission, obviously. But working with programs that have those family relationships already, solid.
Thanks, Michelle. So Renee, I see your hand up, but I just want to ask a quick question. I note that this group gets really jazzed about this topic. We've circled back to it a couple times. So before and we can definitely dedicate more time at this meeting to talk about family engagement. And there's a clear link around monitoring the VCAP and our long-term goals with certainly the family engagement assessment, which is what Jen is referencing and developing, and as well as knowing, as Cynthia said, kind of aggressively going after the data gaps and being able to have access to information. So just noting that those are some themes, and we'll definitely come back to it. So we do have some announcements, but I want to ask, is this something that you think would work with, should we do it again? The hope is that, certainly we can kind of do some rewriting and updating, but is this something that you would recommend that we try at an SAC meeting again with more small groups, focusing on different aspects of the VCAP, but would love just kind of a quick, yeah, we think it works, or, not so much. Would love some feedback in the chat or verbally.
Beth,
It's Renee, and go ahead, Cynthia, go ahead.
Sorry, Renee, I was just going to say super quickly. I actually like this process, like Renee. I struggled a little bit with visioning, but I love being able to lean on colleagues who are more adept at that. One of the things that struck me is I got in a group that I might not know a ton about or feel super comfortable. So thinking about this process, can people self-select so they feel like they have the knowledge they need, or how do you balance diversity of opinions and perspectives? So that's, again, tumbling in my head.
Totally. Yeah, I muffed up the small group assignment, but yes, absolutely, we'll do that. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I just offer kind of along those same lines. I wonder if prompting folks, because I'm still very hung up on but who's doing this, right? Like, I can't talk about monitoring if I don't know who's doing this, but rather than hash that all out, I wonder if kind of more direction to folks to look at the strategy. I'm getting lost in objectives, and right, they were the strategies. Each one was a strategy. So looking at the strategy and finding those that your work touches, right? Like, so it just gets people over the hump of like, well, I don't know if this is happening, but who's doing this? Okay, look at this list and which ones are you involved in? And I just think that little bit of extra direction and keeping it really local to folks' experience might avoid them from saying, well, I don't know what's going on over here because I don't know who's doing that. So that would be the piece of guidance that I would offer. And then I am going to just cram this in here because I held it before and then it came up again, but in all this talk about the relational pieces and the building and the trust, I think there are some bright spots in our system that I think we can garner some really great insight from, and those are home visitors and any service providers who are going into the home. And I see Danielle is on the call, or she was, and so I think about early interventionists who are going into the home, but Head Start home visitors who are going to that home, CIS, starting my career as a home visitor, that is the place where the paradigm shift happens. You are not in a cushy office. You are not in control of the conversations. You are in somebody else's environment. You do have to partner with that family and trust in that family. And so as we're exploring family engagement and how to build that trust and really support that, I wonder if there are some structured activities that we can do to really garnish information from home visitors and anyone who's providing services in the home, because that is just so very different. So thanks for allowing me to spew that out.
Great points. Okay, thank you for the feedback. Any other feedback is welcome. And so I would like us to shift right now. Michelle, do you still have a comment? I see your hand up, but I don't want to cut you off.
Nope, sorry, forgot to put it
Okay,
down.
great. Okay.
Can
So
I
if Michelle,
make
you
one
want to
more
help?
comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I heard a lot of people talk about the importance of rigorous qualitative data, and I love hearing that, especially from a group that it isn't traditionally solely talking about data. So, you know, Kea, Renee, Cynthia, as we are thinking about how we are doing qualitative analysis, which again, that's my background as well, is qualitative and quantitative research methods. We are doing training with our internal policy team at BBF and are using that and using the framework analysis perspective for thinking about how we analyze qualitative data and really having that lens right from the very beginning. So as we're thinking about monitoring the VCAP, I'd love to talk with you, whoever is interested, about how you would think about doing this from a VCAP monitoring perspective as well. I know we're doing it for smaller projects where we're doing a formal, you know, qualitative ask and then analyzing that data in a rigorous way and putting it out. But specific to the VCAP, I'd love to bring you in and think critically about that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to be involved.
Great. So speaking of data, there's a number of opportunities where we really need your input and need your help to engage your networks for input. So just want to call attention to a few of those. The first is the Child Care and Early Childhood Education Systems Analysis is in a pretty significant place where it's coming to a close, and the consultants have put together another document presenting governance options, and there is a survey that you and others can complete to provide input in what you feel like the Vermont system needs in terms of governance. And so we'll put that link in the chat. You should have all received an email asking for your input, but please share it. It is very much for people within government to complete as much as people are private members. So please share that. And if you want some more background, happy to provide that. I would say the quickest way to get up to speed is to watch the testimony. There was a joint hearing provided on April 13th. And so watching that probably gives you the best summary of where things are at. So I'll put that link in the chat. Morgan or Anna, do you want to talk to the suspension and expulsion brief for the? Oh, thanks.
Sure. So we are about to send out both an embargoed copy to certain groups, but as early as next week, we are putting out to the field the suspension and expulsion brief, or a data brief on exclusionary discipline. So we've worked with the Agency of Education, both the data teams and the early childhood ed teams, to identify all of the available data on children under the age of 9 and summarize it in one place. I say brief. BBF is not very great at briefs. It is a 9-page data brief, and there actually is a lot of data and important information in there. What you can expect in that is a compilation of all of the existing data for children under the age of 9, all the limitations and challenges, both from a data perspective, but also here are the implementation challenges in this area across the different sectors, and policy considerations for the system based on that. So this is a very important data brief. This data is not published anywhere else, and it's going to come out on Monday. So we'll make sure you all get a copy of that. Beth, any others that you want me to mention?
The one other thing BBF related that I wanted to mention is that we are about to field our stakeholder survey. So we do an annual stakeholder survey. And so all of you are very much key stakeholders. So when you get that email, please take a few minutes to complete that. It's not It's really important to get your input on what you feel like is the most impactful, what's working around your engagement with BBF, and opportunity to get feedback. So that's just another heads up. So any other updates that you all have that you want to note? And I know
This
we're
is
coming
Michelle.
up to
I was
time.
just wondering
Yeah.
if anybody's heard anything about 283.
Michelle, it's Renee. I don't know exactly. I have heard of 283. I'm tracking 283, but I don't know if you have a specific question about 283.
No, I was just wondering if it's gone through. They keep
As far as I know, it hasn't passed yet, but Morgan, I'm looking at your little box.
Yeah, so I saw Sarita Austin on the steps of the State House yesterday. As far as I know, it has not formally passed. They were discussing it yesterday morning, so I don't know where that landed, but it's still on the table.
Okay.
I've got one announcement I will share. This is kind of big news, but I'm not sure if folks have seen it. So Office of Head Start officially announced, I believe on Monday, that now any child, any family receiving SNAP benefits is now eligible for Head Start and early Head Start services. So this is huge in our world. We've had issues with income eligibility, with raising minimum wage, and it was getting harder and harder. So the increase and now the allowability to enroll any family or any child who's receiving SNAP is just really expanding eligibility. I mean, there are all sorts of concerns about the workforce still, though, and like not having the workforce there and classrooms open and being back at full enrollment. But just wanted to put it out, given that this is a health-focused group. So more to come, but I think it's worth sharing within your networks if you know of folks who are working with these populations. Now if you are receiving SNAP benefits, you're now eligible, categorically eligible to enroll in Head Start or early Head Start. So just wanted to share that here.
Very exciting. That's amazing. All right, we're at time. It's great to see you all. Thank you. We are not going to meet in May. Please join us at the SAC meeting, which is the same week. It happens on Monday afternoon. So hope that you will be able to join us. Anyway, it's great to see you all. More to come.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good morning.
Bye all.
Thank you all.
Bye.